Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting tonight from CBS News election headquarters in New York. Americans today are electing their 98th Congress, as well as a third of the United States Senate, 36 governors, and almost all of the state legislatures. President Reagan is encouraging voters to stay in his corner in the fight to revive the economy, to stay the course. In a few hours, we'll know what verdict the voters have given. But according to a CBS News New York Times exit poll of some 3,000 voters in House elections this afternoon, about 56% appear to have voted for the Democrat. Now, this is a significantly higher breakdown than in 1980 and suggests, I repeat, suggests likely substantial Democratic gains in the House. Also, from our CBS News exit poll, some Senate observations. It appears that 9 of the Senate seats up tonight look very, very close. 6 of those 9 are held by Republicans, 3 by the Democrats. There is a strong possibility that Democrats may make a net gain of at least 2 Senate seats, but only an outside chance that they could make the net gain of 5, which would give them outright control of the Senate. Bruce Morton has more. Bruce?
Dan, as you said, the people we polled were more likely by about 10 points to have voted for the Democrat for Congress today, though translating that into individual House races can be tricky. Still, some issues are clearly working for the Democrats today. We asked what issues were most important in deciding how you voted for Congress today. The people we interviewed said unemployment first, Social Security second. And the people who said that voted Democratic. Those who cited unemployment went Democratic 2-1. Those who cited Social Security, Democratic by almost the same margin. Some issues worked for Republicans as well, of course. They won amongst voters who cited inflation and government spending, but there weren't as many voters who did that. Most of the people we polled did see the congressional vote as a referendum on Reaganomics, and the referendum went against the president 4-3. Our voters split pretty evenly on whether they blamed Reagan or the Democrats for the country's economic ills. The voters we polled also split evenly on whether Reaganomics would eventually help the country. Up until now, most polls have shown them saying yes, it would. Pollsters this year have been talking a lot about the gender gap, the tendency for women to vote more for Democrats, men for Republicans. Our exit polls found that in a number of Senate and gubernatorial races, especially close ones like the Senate race in Virginia. It didn't show up as much where the margins were bigger. So in summary, Dan, this election does look like a referendum on the president's economic policy with local variations, and there are hints the referendum is not going Mr. Reagan's way.
Bruce, is it possible to tell on the basis of our exit polling so far how the voters feel about non-economic issues on today's ballots? For example, questions such as how they feel about a nuclear freeze, the amendment to balance the budget, another one to ban abortion.
They're for the nuclear freeze. They're against the constitutional amendment to ban abortions. They're for one on school prayer. They're for one to balance the budget. But that's not really what was on their minds today. The economy was. And when we asked, are you better or worse off than you were 2 years ago, the answer by a margin of 3-1 was, I'm worse off.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce. We'll be coming back to you often during the evening for the results on those many House races. The polls in Indiana were the first in the country to close, and CBS News estimates, this is a CBS News estimate, that Republican Senator Richard Lugar, the former Rhodes Scholar and incumbent in Indiana, has defeated Democratic challenger, the history professor, Dr. Floyd Fithian. Lugar, on the basis of our CBS News estimate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is on the basis of votes from sample precincts. Lugar's win will be on the margin on the order of 56 to 44%. Very good news for the Republicans early on. Lugar holds on to his seat in Indiana, according to our CBS News estimate. Now, a word about a CBS News estimate. With an estimate, we are using actual votes from a scientific sample of precincts. An estimate enables us to determine the outcome of an election with more precision than an exit poll. Organized labor thinks it could have made the difference in 1980, but didn't. It intends to make no such mistake this time around, as we hear from Bob Simon, who's covering the Midwest this election day.
Phil Hare's union, the clothing workers, has lost some 30,000 jobs over the last 18 months, but Phil is working overtime, getting out the vote.
All right, let's go get them. It's our turn now.
Trying to make sure that what happened in 1980 does not happen today. 2 years ago, less than half of the nation's union members voted for Jimmy Carter. More than any other single factor, that put Ronald Reagan in the White House.
They feel betrayed, and they have a reason to. I mean, we got 3 million more people unemployed today than we had 2 years ago.
Unemployment here has been close to 19%, but that's no guarantee of a big turnout.
Whoever gets in can't do anything about it.
Organized labor has been pouring in money and manpower to convince people that Democrats can make a difference.
Now, the UAW out of 865 is handling the entire upper end of the county.
In Rock Island, Illinois, their man is Lane Evans, a 31-year-old lawyer. If elected to Congress, he'll be only the second Democrat to represent this district since the Civil War. Even with heavy labor support, Evans, like most Democratic congressional candidates, is being outspent by his Republican rival. If Evans wins, his workers say, it will be because hard times are giving birth to a new Democratic coalition.
Diane Whitty, just answering the phone, is the now person that did our town.
In addition to the National Organization for Women, environmentalists and minorities have been active in the campaign here, but the dynamo of the coalition is labor, scurrying to bring workers back into the Democratic fold, which so many deserted 2 years ago. If Phil Hare and his colleagues brought out the vote today, if they deal Reaganomics a crippling blow, they'll start working tomorrow on their real target, Mr. Reagan himself, in 1984.
You voted today? Straight Democratic, I hope, right?
Bob Simon, CBS News, Rock Island, Illinois.
As a footnote, Labor had worked very hard for Floyd Fithian in Indiana in an effort to unseat the Republican senator there, Richard Lugar, but on the basis of our CBS News estimate, Labor or anyone else could do it for Fithian. Lugar, on the basis of our estimate, has won the race in Indiana, holds on to the seat for the Republicans. Abraham Lincoln spent $100,000 to run for president in 1860. Now, we know there's been a problem with inflation since Abraham Lincoln's time, but Abe wouldn't believe what candidates spent this year. As we hear now from Mike Wallace. Mike?
Dan, there may be a recession today in just about every other business in the country, but not in politics. Instead, all kinds of spending records have been broken this year.
Congressional candidates have poured about $300 million into this election, and if you add in state and local races, the price tag reaches a staggering $1 billion. The Federal Election Commission, a tiny agency with just 14 auditors, was supposed to play watchdog on the 2,020 candidates who ran for Congress this year. But the FEC, like many other agencies, has had its budget cut, and it simply cannot do the legwork to make sure every candidate stays within the law. But not all campaign money is monitored by the FEC. Governor's races, for example. And one only had to watch his television set the past few days to see how crucial money has become. For instance, New Yorkers were awash in Mario Cuomo and Lou Lehrman commercials as those two gentlemen came down to the wire in their race for governor. Lehrman had bankrolled his $11.5 million campaign with $7.5 million of his own. Cuomo put together $5 million, much of it from labor. That set a new record for New York. Out in Minnesota in the Senate race, Democrat Mark Dayton spent almost $7 million in his effort to unseat Republican David Durenberger. Of Dayton's $7 million, all but $234,000 was his own. Durenberger is spending $3.5 million.
Stand by.
The upshot of all this, a bigger-than-ever bonanza for television stations and for those consultants who tell the politicians how to win elections. And, say the experts, Dan, perhaps the beginning of a backlash from some Americans who believe that the campaign cash flow has careened out of control.
What about the special interest money that you and Bill Moyers have reported on so much this year, the political action committees? How much did they give in this year's congressional races?
$80 million, Dan. There are 3,200 of those PACs, business, labor, trade association. They gave $80 million to the candidates, and that's up 300% from the last time around.
Well, to paraphrase somebody, you talk about $1 million here and $1 million there, and the first thing you know, you're talking about real money. On Wall Street today, investors' belief that Republicans will do well in the elections helped push the Dow Jones Industrial Average still higher over the 1,000 level. Analysts said that anticipation that interest rates will drop again also contributed to the heavy trading. Pope John Paul II today mixed the political with the spiritual during his unprecedented papal visit to Spain. He told Spaniards to respect the results of last week's elections, which put back in power the Socialist Party. The Pope added that the Church expected similar respect from Spain's new government. In part, the Pope's speech was seen as a warning to Spain's right not to subvert the democratic process. More on the Pope in Spain from Richard Roth.
The guests outside in the courtyard of Spain's royal palace all had printed invitations from King Juan Carlos. But the guests inside were getting personal introductions to the Pope. After shaking hands with Socialist Prime Minister-elect Felipe González, John Paul said he had come to pay respects to Spain's government with no shade of doubt. The pontiff's travels were confined to Madrid today, but his schedule was a full one, and at times John Paul was finding it difficult to pay rapt attention. The Pope was fighting fatigue in late morning. By late afternoon, some of the faithful had caught the bug, but John Paul was clearly reinvigorated. Robed in dark purple to celebrate an outdoor mass for the dead, the Pope delivered a homily of unyielding conservatism on family issues he considers crucial. You can never legitimize the death of an innocent, he said. Spain's new socialist government favors easing the legal ban on abortion. Marriage cannot be dissolved, said the Pope. Last year, Spain legalized civil divorce. The Catholic Church in Spain admits it is facing a crisis, and the Vatican is plainly worried that without a strong reminder from the Pope, social and political changes here will accelerate an erosion of faith. Richard Roth, CBS News, Madrid.
An 8-week-long gun smuggling trial in New York's Brooklyn federal court went to the jury today. The question to be answered, were the defendants working for the IRA or the CIA? David Culhane has our report.
He is an unlikely-looking conspirator. Michael Flannery is a retired insurance man. And this day, he and Margaret Mary, his wife of 47 years, are on their way to Mass at Blessed Sacrament Church in Queens, New York. A trip he has made daily for most of his 81 years. And this day, he is on his way to federal court, a trip he has made each day for the last 8 weeks. Both trips, he says, are a part of his destiny.
I was born into a land that I love, as everyone should love their homeland.
The home he loves is Ireland, a country racked by political violence for longer than anyone can remember. Michael Flannery remembers because at 14 he was an IRA soldier, then a prisoner of war. At 24 he was ordered to leave the country. He came to the United States and continued to support a united Ireland, until a revulsion in the United States against the violence in Northern Ireland led to a crackdown.
We will do everything we possibly can to prevent American citizens' assistance to the terrorists in Ireland.
If American policy changed, Michael Flannery didn't. He was arrested by the FBI on one of those mornings when he came out of church. He and 4 other men were charged with conspiring to smuggle guns to the Irish Republican Army.
We were doing no wrong. We were working with the CIA.
In court, he and his co-defendants surprised everyone by suggesting a link with the CIA.
With the knowledge, assuredly. With the approval, I don't know.
A former CIA man who is now writing a critique of the agency testified that the CIA at least knew of the arms traffic. The prosecution scoffed at the idea of a CIA connection, and the case is now before the jury. David Culhane, CBS News, Brooklyn, New York.
In words that might comfort the losers in today's elections, the 16th century French essayist Montaigne wrote, "There are some defeats more triumphant than victories." But then Montaigne never played in the National Football League, where the philosophy is winning is the only thing. And Eric Ingberg reports tonight that both owners and players are holding fast to that simple motto in negotiations to end the players' strike.
NFL players here for the talks tried subway diplomacy today, fanning out to lobby Football Commissioner Pete Rozelle and federal labor officials for action to make the owners dig deeper into their pockets. The union's leaders say there's little left for their own side to give. The latest ongoing stall in the negotiations virtually assures that no games will be played this Sunday, leaving at best 9 more games and an 11-game season. NFL planners who once declared that 12 games are needed for a real season today were talking up the advantages of 11 and prepared to go to 10 if necessary.
Across the 25.
The union's earliest demand before the strike began was for a pay scale which would have given a fourth-year player, for example, $170,000 a year. That was dropped to $158,000, then $139,000. Management's first offer would have paid a fourth-year player $45,000. The offer now is $60,000. The strike has already cost the average NFL player, who earns about $85,000 a year, $36,000 in lost salary. NFL owners put their own losses at $200 million. Their monthly television rights payments, which cushioned the owners' losses during the early weeks there was no football, were shut off by the three networks yesterday.
The networks have also told the NFL to forget about playing football in February to make up for lost games. Other sports and entertainment shows, they say, have already been booked, and it would be expensive to move them. TV executives and the league have not yet begun to discuss ways to make up for the money both lost in the strike. But one idea under study is more timeouts to make room for more commercials when and if football returns to living room screens. Eric Engberg, CBS News, New York.
The Commerce Department today reported that lower mortgage interest rates helped push the sales of single-family houses up more than 23% in September. The annual rate of sales reached the highest level since May of 1981. Much attention has been given to U.S. efforts to overtly help the non-leftist regimes of Central America, among them El Salvador and Honduras. Those efforts include military and economic assistance, but there also are covert efforts, as Bob Shackney reports.
U.S. government officials confirm that the CIA has organized and is supporting a covert military operation in Central America, targeted against the left-wing Sandinista government of Nicaragua. Officials who ask not to be identified say the operation is based in neighboring Honduras, that it involves small-scale paramilitary forces conducting raids across the border designed to harass the Nicaraguan government. The officials say the operation was approved by President Reagan and is strongly supported by CIA Director William Casey. On a day-to-day basis, it's being directed by U.S. Ambassador to Honduras, John Negroponte. In public, State Department officials declined to confirm or deny these reports. The covert operation in Central America has drawn sharp criticism on Capitol Hill among members of both House and Senate Intelligence Committees. Among the most outspoken is Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy.
Well, I've told the president I feel he makes a foreign policy mistake if he wants to substitute covert activity for a good foreign policy. And I think that they'd find us as a very attractive alternative to the Soviet Union or to Cuba if we're open and above board in doing it. If they feel that we're simply trying to subvert them by clandestine activity, it's never going to work.
The goals of the Nicaraguan operation are unclear. Officials familiar with it describe the operation as small and limited, clearly capable of creating problems for the Sandinistas, but not big enough to overthrow them. Robert Shackney, CBS News, Washington.
It's an economic truism and no surprise that in hard times the number of Army volunteers goes up. But as Pentagon correspondent Bill Lynch reports, quantity does not always mean quality.
America's all-volunteer Army on the march. Take a good look, because chances are excellent over 60% of these soldiers will be casualties. Not from enemy fire, but from the Army's own purge of low-quality soldiers. The Madison Avenue ads do not say how tough it is to make the grade in today's Army. A majority of the enlisted force has below-average scores on Army aptitude tests, with every third soldier in the lowest allowable mental category. Many are functional illiterates. This year, the Army is teaching fifth-grade reading to 18,000 soldiers. Of 94,000 young men and women who signed on in 1979 for three-year enlistments, over 34,000 dropped out or were thrown out before their hitch was up. Another 25,000 were barred from re-enlisting. That huge turnover is expensive. It cost $1 billion to recruit and train the Army's unwanted soldiers.
We say be all you can be. There's no barrier to growing and to being all you can be when you're in the service. If you are not suited for the service, once you are in and have found that that's the case, then we suggest maybe you don't want to stay.
Every fourth soldier who enlisted in 1979 has been told he or she cannot stay. Re-enlistment standards have been tightened to weed out poor quality soldiers, those unfit for a high-tech Army. the latest crop of recruits shows more promise. Nearly 9 in 10 have high school diplomas, and more than half score above average in Army entrance tests. But the Army is still faced with many low-scoring soldiers in high-tech jobs. Most fuel and electrical specialists on the computerized M1 tank are in the lowest medal group. Officials say it takes longer and costs more to train low-scoring soldiers. The Army relies heavily on these scores in deciding which soldiers to keep, a practice questioned by some experts.
There's no absolute relationship between these entry test scores and whether or not a person is a good soldier. They are good predictors of training capability. They are not related to how well a person's going to perform on the job.
3 years ago, because of an error in scoring the tests, the Army discovered too late a majority of its new recruits were in the lower medal category. Thousands are still in uniform with few marketable civilian skills. When their enlistments end next year, the Army's message will be, Uncle Sam doesn't want you anymore. Bill Lynch, CBS News, The Pentagon.
It's been looking like the Oscar Awards these last few days, almost everywhere and every time you turn on your television. The big names of Hollywood are turning out in droves. Terry Drinkwater tells us to turn out the vote for their nominees.
Stars, some not seen in a long time, flashed all over the TV screens, glitter and glitz from Tinseltown, to try to win over that last wavering voter. Chris Christopherson sang for Jerry Brown and talked, too, for the Democratic candidate for senator. Wayne Newton and Andy Williams did the same for Republican Pete Wilson. Roy Rogers was against gun control. Robert Redford was in Utah helping the Democratic Senate hopeful. But support for the nuclear freeze initiatives in 9 states attracted more Hollywood notables than any other issue or candidate. The president's own daughter, actress Patti Davis, with Lee Remick, sang the anti-bomb song. The leads for the nuclear freeze were Paul Newman and Carol O'Connor. Charlton Heston led the Battle of the Stars against the freeze.
Freeze wouldn't be honored with the Soviet Union, and it couldn't be verified.
Then there was Buddy Epson for Republican candidates and Warren Beatty for the Democrats. In all, there were certainly no Oscar or Emmy award-winning performances anyone would vote for, but that's not the purpose. The stars simply came out to try to influence real votes, the ones that count in the real world. And they probably did. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Hollywood.
And that's the CBS Evening News for this Tuesday. Dan Rather reporting from CBS News election headquarters in New York. Stay with us. We'll be right back with full coverage of Campaign 82.